Anyway, what's happening next, Peter?
I think we should have Mark Graham on the line, and Mark's heavily involved in this destructive logging that's been on the headlines. It's back in the Dorrigo area. That's
right. He's a staunch forest protector and ecologist out there in the mid-north coast, and doing huge amount of work, putting a lot of energy and to good effect, because at least it's making them national news now with the project on Sunday running. That really good piece, a 7-minute piece on really exposing the logging of koala habitat. Here's a little snippet from the project just to set the scene.
The survival of the species threatened by bushfire and loss of habitat.
Fighting to stay alive.
Their habitat bulldozed for development.
Scientists say that the population in the state of New South Wales has decreased by up to 60% in the last 11 years.
It's no secret koalas are in trouble, and 1/5 of the state's koala population lives in this region. Right next door to these pristine national parks, the state-owned Forestry Corporation has been convicted of felling trees vital to the koala's survival. The Forestry Corporation answers to 3 state government ministers, or it's supposed to anyway, and it's now facing multiple prosecutions over the destruction of koala habitat. That could see it fined millions of dollars.
Good morning, Mark. You're an ecologist. Can you fill us in on the detail of what's happening back there in the Dorrigo area?
Good morning, Peter. It's nice to join you this morning. Sadly, old-growth forest within Ellis State Forest is being felled this very day. These areas are known to be of global significance to our koalas. There's evidence of these old-growth trees, upon these old-growth trees of large males in that very forest. Almost the entire surrounding landscape sustained significant harm and damage, and there are many dead forests in that landscape because of the Black Spring fires. So where the fires burnt from Bees Nest Fire in September 2019 right through until the Mega Liberation Trail fire in November 2019. And this area in Ellis State Forest that's currently being logged, this area of old-growth forest, parts of it didn't burn, and most of it burnt very lightly, which means that it's effectively a refuge for our globally significant fauna. So there are koalas in there, there are yellow-bellied gliders, there are stuttering frogs, there are greater gliders in these forests. These are magnificent 40-plus metre stand-height eucalypt forests, and in this time, in the year 2022, these forests are being destroyed this very day. And in the last week, there's been a 50% addition to the harvesting pressure. It went from kind of 2 crews up to 3 working in these old-growth forests, and it's a global shame what's playing out in Ellis State Forest.
I find it horrendous that people are so ignorant in this day and age that they don't realise the absolute importance. We're part of a system, and we're not talking a handful of reliant animals here. We're talking over 1,000 endangered species in New South Wales alone, and there is no selective logging anymore with the new regulations. And Matt Kean is making a lot of noise, but it's not working. They're ignoring what's happening.
Look, there's no way what the state logging agency is currently doing will double our koala populations. It will halve or worse our koala populations. We reported last weekend, or the weekend before last, 56 crimes to the EPA. They came out and dismissed the lot. Been in there last weekend with an independent tree health expert to reinvestigate, and whilst the EPA said that the wounds on these giant centuries-old brush boxes and tallowards and blue gums were superficial, this tree health expert concluded that many of these wounds were significant. They've already compromised the health of these trees, and they're going to shorten their lifespan. As well as that, there is a legitimate giant brush box, which we measured diameter at breast height, 30 centimetres above the ground on the upper side, at 151 down to 147 centimetres. All trees over 140 centimetres, all brush box trees, need to be protected by law, and this tree's been logged, and the EPA came in and said it was 138 centimetres. So I'm inviting the EPA and Minister Griffin to come and show me the tree that they measured. We'll measure together. There's been an independent assessment done. These are acts of koala extinction, and they're egregious acts of ecocide, and it's got to stop. It's the regional water supply catchment area. These are really critical parts of the proposed Great Koala National Park. 1 in 5 koalas depend upon that area for their future, and their habitat is being obliterated, and their decline to extinction is being accelerated.
Yes, and so, Matt Kean calls the EPA the tough cop on the beat. He claims credit for having given them some backbone and given them some teeth. What would you say to the claim that the EPA are a tough cop on the beat after seeing them in action out there?
Well, since making those reports 8 days ago, we went in and reinvestigated, and clearly they've dismissed all of these legitimate crimes that have been mapped and photographed and, substantive evidence provided. But since then, additional crimes have been committed. So a massive multiple-century-old tallowood had really significant wounds to its base where a 25-ton-plus machine had driven over it and gouged out its base. We found another critically endangered scrub turpentine that had been mashed by a machine. It's highly likely to die in the coming weeks or months. I don't have any faith or confidence in the EPA after having seen their appalling dismissal of what were substantive, legitimate crimes and breaches of the very few laws that forestry operates under.
Yeah. It's a complete ignorance by the people who are allowed to be in that forest. They have no understanding of if you damage the bark of the base of those trees, it lets infection in, and the tree ends up dying. This is primary school stuff. I've learnt this at primary school. I've been on the land all my life.
It's not just kind of fungi and other pathogens, but it's the actions of fire. So, we're going to get more and more fire. So when you take away the bark, the protective covering of these eucalypts, you let fire in, and that's then a significant process that will shorten their lifespan because the fire gets in, it weakens them, and even with repeated fire events, we've seen in Black Spring and Black Summer literally millions of old-growth irreplaceable trees taken down by fire. And for example, in the case of glossy black cockatoos, and this landscape used to be a state significant stronghold for them, I've done 4 or 5 months of surveys up there now, where previously, prior to the fires, I would have seen hundreds of individuals. I've seen 2. In that landscape, it would now appear as though glossy black cockatoos are very close to extinct. It appears as though they're functionally extinct, and I'm in discussions with the State Conservation Agency staff working on it, and they concur with my assessment.
Yes, I was out scouting the other day for koalas, and it's alarming how few you can find in areas where once they were prolific. But I wanted to. You and I have both been on social media since the project was aired, and seeing some of the comments. Obviously, people are appalled by what they're seeing in that report, but also a few industry apologists coming on and saying, but we get all of our timber power poles from here, so we've got to keep logging in these forests, and those forests are plantations anyway. What would you say to some of those claims that that these forests aren't that significant, and the things we get out of them are more important?
Well, the latter claim about it being plantation, that's just a blatant lie. These are old-growth tall eucalypt forests. When it comes to power poles and other structural needs, we've got all sorts of alternative materials which can be used, which don't require. It's not critical that we take out big, tall eucalypt forests to do this. I guess if we're looking at power poles, undergrounding our power supply negates the need for any form of pole, but in the event that we can't use eucalypt poles, we've got concrete, we've got metal, we've got composite materials. There are a series of alternative materials available that don't necessitate creating koala extinction. It's that simple.
It seems to be the driver, though, for this whole thing is that, we say, koalas are being driven to extinction, and people say, yeah, but people need wood chips. And they just sort of they do actually dismiss. I saw, Hamish McDonald on the project saying, we all love koalas, and nobody would disagree with saving the koalas. But there is actually a small but significant part of the community who do take the attitude that the koalas are expendable, don't they?
Oh, look, I suspect that there are people who, don't give a brass razoo about koalas. That's disturbing. They are iconic. And if we get koala conservation right, so much of our additional forest biodiversity and our globally significant forest fauna will be given a future. Koalas really are an iconic and flagship species for a reason, and the guff coming out of the government about doubling their population just doesn't pass muster. It's actually an absolute lie when you've got James Griffin and Matt Kean and all the other hoo-has in the coalition allowing this blatant, broad-scale destruction of the best koala habitats whilst putting out into the media that they're doubling their population. It doesn't wash. It's a blatant lie, and the lies have got to stop.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that because I have audio here of Justin Fields grilling Matt Kean about New South Wales Forest Corp's logging of koalas. So I might play that for you and we can have a further discussion on that afterwards, hey?
Awesome.
Is logging koala habitat in state-owned public native forests making doubling the koala population easier or harder?
Well, I think there's logging any koala habitat is going to make it harder to achieve those objectives, which are in the state's interest, in my view, to protect our koalas and our biodiversity. And, certainly as Treasurer, I'll continue to look at ways where we can meet that objective.
So it would be your preference that we weren't logging koala habitat in New South Wales?
It's my preference that we protect our biodiversity in sustainable ways.
And yet, when challenged, what are you going to do directly, Matt Kean has no answer to how to withdraw the state government agency from logging our public native forests. How does that make you feel, Mark?
Appalling. Absolutely appalling. It's all appalling. It's just we live in the time of doublespeak, of extreme disinformation, and the reality is that the coalition government are koala killers. Going back to Berejiklian and Barilaro, this is an outfit of koala extinction, and shame on them across all space and time. Global shame upon every parliamentarian in the coalition who is complicit in this. And on the North Coast, we've got the National Party. Galapagos is going. I think he's going with a significant amount of shame on his shoulders. But then we've got Gurmesh Singh Coffs, and we've got Mel Pavey, who are cheerleaders for koala extinction. Shame on them.
Absolutely.
It appalls me that the ignorance of people who are in there involved with this destruction. They're not qualified to be in there and dealing with this. In the public native forest, our iconic species are our responsibility. And to blatantly ignore in the manner that they're doing. And the best we've got is Matt Kean, who in some areas we think is doing a good job, but he's obviously frightened off by the pressure that's been put on him. They're the wrong people in the job. They are not qualified to be in that forest and dealing with our public native forest.
Look, I think it goes from the ground, and there is a willful and intentionalness to this. They're hitting the best of the old growth. They've used the radar data to scan and to go, well, where's the koala candy? We'll get to that quickly. But the Forestry Corporation has engaged in an intentional hit job, an extinction job on all the best koala habitats. So currently we've got Ellis being absolutely decimated, and we've also got Bagawa to the west of Cots. That area is dripping with koalas. Every single grey gum in the forest is laden with scratches. These are known to be globally significant koala hotspots. Arcs and hubs that the State Conservation Agency has identified that the Forestry Corporation goes in and annihilates with their industrial logging regimes.
It used to be selective logging, and the old loggers I've spoken to from 50 years ago are horrified at what they're doing to the forest now. There is no selective logging. The new IFOAs have obliterated all of that, and it's moronic. To put it nicely, it's moronic what they're doing.
Well, I go so far as to say it's suicidal, because these forests are the very fabric of life. They provide the base flow for our rivers. They hold so much carbon. They are our answer to the climate crisis. Of course, in days gone by, not that many years ago, these giant trees that have all been damaged, there needed to be a 5-metre buffer around them. So machines couldn't go within 5 metres. That was stripped. And now these giant machines go in and bugger them up and, damage them, harm them and shorten their life. So we're going backwards. We're going backwards at a rapid rate of knots. And technically there is some type of sustainable yield in these forests, and the old foresters were probably doing something pretty close to that. But we've got 25, 27-tonne machines trashing entire forests. You can't take a machine of that size into these beautiful forests and not absolutely harm the whole system and destroy it. The mashing of the understory, the churning of the soil, the compaction of the soil, as well as, of course, the damage on the trees that are supposed to be legally retained and protected. It's an extinction operation of the highest order, and it's alarming, and the world needs to know about this. It really does.
The recommendation on the new IFOAs was a 30-metre buffer on an unmarked watercourse. They reduced it to 5 metres, and then they ignored it. And this is your aquatic species, is your water quality to the coast, and we wonder why we have sedimentation in rivers because of this ignorance. Now, we questioned Chris Galapagos personally on these new regulations. He knew nothing about them. He said, we get paperwork thrown in our face a couple of days prior and we have to vote on it. Well, if you don't understand it, you shouldn't have voted on it. But they're just a bunch of sheep. It's on their back. We elect them to represent us, and they should be qualified to vote on this stupidity. And it's a pathetic excuse, and they all use it.
Well, it's fascinating. So I did see Galapagos quoted yesterday saying he was proud of his role in the koala wars. I'm also aware that Galapagos was previously a consultant. I actually came across him in a professional capacity. So, he does presumably have some capacity to interrogate, review and understand, technical materials. But he chooses not to because it's just blind redneck ideology. And that's what the New South Wales Nats are on the North Coast. Blind redneck ideologues who are literally disadvantaging their own constituents in the agriculture and the fishing industry because they're buggering up entire catchments. Ellis, Clouds Creek, Wild Cattle Creek, the whole Clarence River is dependent upon the health of that because that's the Nimboida and the Blix River. 130,000 people get their drinking water supply. All the farmers and the fishers downstream need those catchments to be healthy, to continue to flow, to continue to be clean. And we've got an operation right now that is demonstrably harming that and permanently impacting upon water security. We're in dire straits. This is existential stuff that is playing out at an accelerating rate of knots in the public forest estate.
Is exactly right. Our health is the river health, the water health, and it starts in those hills where nobody can see it, and the contamination, the aquatic species suffer, and it continues to the coast. All the fishing, the fish breeding grounds. It is absolute ignorance. I'm astounded at the ignorance we're showing on this matter.
Oh, look, we're all going to suffer the consequences, including those doing the harm. This is dire stuff. I'm actually potentially tomorrow going up in a chopper to document the lost water security across the regional water supply catchment area. It depends a bit upon the weather, but we can quantify the extent to which our water security has been permanently impacted upon and harmed and lost. It's like puncturing the tank at the top of the catchment, the base flow, and you can't repair it. It's like a fatal wound to your water security. Australia's drying out, getting hotter. We need the Dorrigo Plateau to be as wet as it damn well can for as long as it can, because that's our water security. And, whole swathes of the Murray-Darling Basin are being abandoned and taken out of productivity because they don't have water security.
Yeah, it is madness, but most people now see the madness, Mark. I think that those who are, in the koala killer faction are seriously outnumbered, 10-1 kind of thing. So what are you asking for people to do now to help with Ellis? Like you're saying that there's old growth koala habitat being logged in Ellis today. What would you like people to do today to help stop that from happening?
Look, I guess from people's, desktop warriors, sending letters, emails, getting active on social media. But if people would like to join us on the ground, it doesn't look like the EPA is going to issue a stop work order. So we may well look at doing a community stop work order. There's significant concern across the community about these ongoing egregious crimes and koala extinction operations. Likewise at Bagawa State Forest, there's a whole host of really concerned community members, and we may yet need to directly oppose the ongoing old-growth destruction. And I would encourage anybody with time or interest and resources to get behind the ongoing campaign to stop the ecocide and to try to prevent the extinction of our koalas, most pointedly within Ellis State Forest.
Well, thank you for bringing it to our attention today, Mark, and thank you for all your efforts to stand up for forests and to get others to do the same. We'll keep a line on this, and hopefully you can keep us posted with developments as they occur.
Look, I'd love to. Thank you so much for the chance to come and speak on behalf of the voiceless. We've got to do the best we can by our future and that of all future generations, and our forests are our future.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's great information you've given us, and, well, not great, but informative. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
That was Mark Graham, who's a forest ecologist down there in the Dorrigo Coffs Harbour region, and he's been out in Ellis State Forest measuring and documenting the damage being done by our New South Wales Forest Corps, the state-owned corporation which is responsible for logging our public native forests and forcing our koalas into extinction. It's
an absolute disgrace. Absolute disgrace. The EPA, Toothless, we've had this discussion with them down at Coffs Harbour, and they're just a front. They're defunded. There's a handful of people, and they do nothing. And Matt Kean really needs to pick his act up. If he's the best they've got, we should change government.
He is indeed the minister who is responsible for forestry. He is the shareholder minister for the Forestry Corporation. So they've tried to disperse forestry around amongst a bunch of different ministries, and Dougal Saunders is another one who's got his hands in the pie. But Matt Kean's the top bloke. He's the treasurer, and he's the former minister for the environment, and he's the one who really we need to be putting the screws on to get him to actually do the right thing here. I know Justin Field, that was a great session that Justin Field had that we played that snippet from before, and he was fronting him with some very direct questions, which Matt Kean was looking very dodgy as he tried not to answer them.